This is a CBS News Special Report on the invasion of Grenada. Attack at dawn. Here is CBS News correspondent Dan Rather.
Good evening. Almost one full day after an American military invasion of Grenada began, fighting continues tonight on the tiny Caribbean island. At least 2 U.S. servicemen are confirmed killed in that fighting. 23 others officially confirmed as wounded, many of them seriously. The invasion has powerfully overshadowed the tragic events in Beirut. There, the number of dead American servicemen from Sunday's terrorist bombing continues to grow. The confirmed toll in Beirut now 216. CBS News has learned that Vice President Bush is on his way to Beirut for a morale-boosting visit. But today's startling event is Grenada. A Reagan administration official tonight said units of the 82nd Airborne Division would be sent there. It will be asked to control the airports so Army Rangers can battle pockets of continuing resistance. From whom the resistance comes is unclear, whether it be Cubans and or the Grenada militia. More than 200 armed Cubans have been captured, many of them wounded. 14 Cubans were reported killed. The Cuban government said tonight its forces on Grenada had been ordered not to surrender. So the day began with an American military invasion. Here's how it happened. Since Marxists grabbed power in Grenada 4 years ago, the small Caribbean island nation has been of concern to the United States. It was the middle of last week, however, when real options began to take shape. That was when Grenada's hardline Marxist military leaders violently overthrew the government of more moderate Marxist Prime Minister Maurice Bishop. This new coup was discussed by President Reagan and Secretary of State Schultz while they were in Augusta, Georgia on Saturday. The meetings began early in the morning and followed them to the golf course. Late Sunday, the tentative decision was made to act, at least ostensibly, in response to a request for help from small Caribbean nations. The plans were organized Monday, the presidential order signed last night to go ahead. During this time, U.S. Marines and Army Ranger paratroopers, as well as a U.S. Navy task force, began to assemble near Grenada. Target time, 5:30 this morning. With lightning speed, the 1,900 Marines and paratroopers struck. They struck from 2 points. With a 12-ship carrier-led Navy task force standing guard off Grenada's northeast and southwest coasts, the first American military to land were Army Rangers. They were dropped by parachute at the Point Salinas airport. Their mission? Clear barricades from the Cuban-built runway so U.S. Air Force transports with the rest of the soldiers could land. At about the same time, to the northeast, at the Pearls airport, the Marines went into action, landing by helicopter and by amphibious vessels. Their capture of Pearls apparently was swift. The mission at Point Salinas was not. There, the Army Rangers encountered armed Cubans and fighting ensued. It reportedly was there that most of the casualties were suffered. As the operation got underway, the United States officially notified both the Soviet Union and Cuba of the American intentions. No word on how either communist country responded. Last night, President Reagan held a super-secret White House meeting with congressional leaders. No word of opposition reported there. It was 13 hours after the invasion began that the president formally notified Congress of the action as required under the Vietnam-era War Powers Act. It was the 4th time that President Reagan has informed Congress of a troop commitment under that act. Retired U.S. Marine General Fred Haines is our CBS consultant for combat affairs. General Haines, as best you can make out, what is happening on the island right now? Why is this fighting continuing?
Dan, we've just seen that the Marines landed in this area and the Airborne Rangers conducted an operation in the southern end of the island. I believe there are 2 major things going on now. First of all, these forces will have to determine where the remainder of the defending forces are on the island, and secondly, to determine the quality of resistance. After all, the U.S. forces are outnumbered to some extent. We're not sure just how much, but there are about 1,200 of the island defenders in the so-called regular Grenadan forces and some 3,000 to 5,000 militia.
What kind of Soviet arms do they have, or did they have when it started?
Dan, as far as we know, they're equipped with small arms. We're not certain that there was anything heavier than some anti-aircraft weapons which were used down here in the defense of this airfield. It's a very lightly armed force.
And where does it go from here in your judgment?
Dan, I think the Marines in particular will have to leave fairly soon. This force, I'm almost certain, must be the 22nd Marine Amphibious Unit, which is the force due to go to Beirut to relieve the Marines there sometime in the following month, about mid-November. So the swiftness of the operation is important, certainly, to the Marines. The Ranger element down here is one of the major ready units, I think, from the U.S. Army, stationed in the U.S., and it probably ought to be reconstituted as a ready force. What next? One can surmise that someone will have to remain here to ensure that stability sets in. And so what would that be? Probably another Army force, perhaps even the 82nd Airborne.
We have some indication tonight it would be the 82nd Airborne. We have only a few seconds left for this, but are you surprised, and should we be worried, General, that the island is not already secure, that the fighting is still going on?
No, I don't think so, Dan. I'm concerned, obviously, about any casualties that occur, but I think the quality of the defending force is low. I think we're seeing something very much like we saw with the Argentines against the British last summer. Thank you very much, General Haynes. One jumping off point for today's assault on Grenada is here. That's about 100 miles away, the island of Barbados. As far as the U.S. military is concerned, the final stop for U.S. reporters trying to cover this war. CBS News correspondent Sandy Gilmore and his CBS News crew managed to get closer to the action today a little. Gilmore now has the latest from Barbados.
Hundreds of soldiers have been ferried out of Barbados into Grenada throughout the day and night. A medevac plane for carrying wounded arrived here tonight. Caribbeans joined 2,000 Marines and Special Forces who stormed the island nation before dawn. Radio Free Grenada, before Marines shut it down, called for help, saying fighting was intense. The Marines secured Grenada's airports early on, but officials won't say whether or when American citizens may be evacuated. Caribbean prime ministers are already talking about forming a new government.
And it would be hoped to install the interim government virtually as soon as the fighting is over and the consultations can be carried out.
CBS News has learned that the U.S. wants to see the exiled Grenada Democratic Movement come to power. But its president, Professor Francis Alexis, told Caribbean journalists today that he was not vying to be prime minister.
Right now we're concentrating our energies on reconciliation.
No one here is saying whether the invading forces are meeting any resistance tonight, but clearly the U.S. Marines have things in Grenada under control. And already the U.S. and Caribbean governments are talking about the kind of man they'd like to have in a newly elected democratic government in Grenada. Sandy Gilmore, CBS News, Barbados.
This is for everybody who has to work on Saturdays.
Is anybody here? Guess I'll have to copy this myself. Oh, well, it was good yesterday.
If you have to work on Saturdays, you're not alone. Now somebody else is working too.
Who is it?
Pick up a Federal Express.
Federal Express. Saturday pickup for Monday delivery.
If you hate cleaning bathrooms, you'll love new Scrub-Free Bathroom Cleaner. Scrub-Free works as hard as a cleanser, but with no scrubbing. Here's proof. With cleansers, you have to scrub hard. With foam, you still work hard, but it doesn't get as clean. But new Scrub-Free works on contact with no scrubbing. Just put it on and wipe it off. See, clearly superior. New Scrub-Free cleans faster, easier. You'll love new Scrub-Free. It's clearly superior.
Grenada is the smallest nation in the Western Hemisphere. The whole tear-shaped island is just 133 square miles, about twice the area size of Washington, D.C. Yet, as Morton Dean reports, Grenada has been a cause of grief in Washington for many months.
As the Soviets have increased their military power, they've been emboldened to extend that power. On the small island of Grenada, at the southern end of the Caribbean chain, the Cubans, with Soviet financing and backing, are in the process of building an airfield with a 10,000-foot runway. Grenada doesn't even have an air force. Who is it intended for?
The Reagan administration believed that the airport was intended for the Cubans and the Soviets to help spread subversion. Grenada's Marxist government insisted the airport was intended for use by tourists. The island does have the stuff of a travel agent's dreams, harbors that are postcard pretty, picturesque towns, sandy, sun-drenched beaches. But Marxism and tourism didn't seem to mix. In the 4 years since the communists came to power, fewer and fewer tourists came to play. The first European tourist who reported seeing the island was Christopher Columbus in 1498. Since then, several different flags have flown over Grenada. It was a French colony, then it was a British colony. It didn't have its own flag, didn't gain its independence until 9 years ago, in 1974. The first Prime Minister, Eric Gary, was an unusual man, an eccentric who had a great interest in flying saucers. He was in office for 5 years when a coup pushed him out and brought in a Marxist, a fiery young lawyer, Maurice Bishop, who became head of the People's Revolutionary Government. He developed close ties with Fidel Castro. Cuban technicians arrived. They moved mountains, filled in harbors, and built that airport, the airport that alarmed the Reagan administration. Bishop, a charismatic leader, had suspended the Constitution. And there were reports that he ruled by fear, reports that his political enemies were tortured. Yet it appears that it was his allies who moved against him last week and caused his murder. Marxists who claimed that Bishop was not orthodox or militant enough. But Bishop had often warned of a U.S. invasion.
If they feel they have the right to come down to our country to try to tell us what to do, or worse yet, to try to send soldiers or mercenaries to fight in our country, they will discover it is easier to land than to leave. A lot of dead bodies to fill the island.
Some of the U.S. Marines and Army Rangers who are fighting tonight on Grenada may feel they've been there before. As we hear from Pentagon correspondent David Martin, in a sense they have.
The Pentagon had rehearsed this before, in 1981, a mock invasion of a Caribbean island. It took place in Puerto Rico, but even then the Grenadian government of Maurice Bishop protested that it was his island the U.S. really had in mind. Finally, it was Bishop's death which provided the occasion for the real thing, an occasion for the Pentagon to seize a moment of chaos and rid itself of a nagging problem in the Caribbean. Both the President and senior Defense Department officials had warned about the threat which tiny Grenada posed to the U.S.
The functioning of the Atlantic Alliance in event of war could be seriously impaired by the military presence of the Soviets in Cuba and in other places like Grenada.
The airfield at Salinas Point worried the Pentagon most. Cubans were lengthening a runway which could be used to refuel aircraft carrying Havana's troops to fight against pro-Western forces in Africa. When Libyan planes carrying arms to Nicaragua were stopped and searched in Brazil, Pentagon officials pointed out that had the airfield in Grenada been completed, the Libyans would have had a friendlier place to land. Tonight, that airfield is in American hands, the most dramatic demonstration yet that the U.S. has resumed its former role of world policeman. 3,500 American servicemen exercising in Honduras on the doorstep of the Sandinista regime in Nicaragua. 1,600 Marines in Beirut in a bloody attempt to keep the peace. 800 paratroopers in the Sinai Desert monitoring the treaty between Egypt and Israel. A carrier battle group in the Arabian Sea guarding against Iranian threats to close the Persian Gulf. And more U.S. Navy ships off Sakhalin Island searching for the remains of Korean Airlines Flight 7.
The risks of policing the world are obvious. American dead in Beirut and Grenada. As yet, the benefits are not so obvious. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
The shots being fired tonight on Grenada are being heard far beyond that tiny dot in the Caribbean. They're making friendly nations uneasy and unfriendly nations unpleasant and perhaps more dangerous. More from Bob Schieffer at the State Department.
British Prime Minister Thatcher seemed embarrassed by the U.S. action and told Parliament she had raised doubts about it to President Reagan beforehand, but the opposition had a field day.
It does appear from what the Foreign Secretary has told us that Her Majesty's government has on this occasion been deceived by its American ally.
The French government issued a statement tonight saying no nation has the right to intervene in another unless requested to do so by the United Nations. In the U.S. Congress, the administration had its defenders, but some worried that the action would increase chances for confrontation with Cuba and the Soviet Union.
I think it's important for people to know that this country has taken at least 20 Cubans prisoner in this situation. Now, that has enormous implications. I don't know where that's going. You see, what will be the Cuban response to that? What can be the Soviet response to that?
One morning we will wake to hear that a young American and a young Soviet have faced each other in one of these lands. A shot will have been fired and the world will bleed.
In Moscow tonight, the Soviets, who have been accused by some U.S. officials of causing the violence in Grenada, used their TV newscast to denounce the U.S. action as a bandit-style intervention. Cuba's Fidel Castro has not yet commented personally, but some anti-Castro Cuban exiles in this country, while generally approving the U.S. invasion, also expressed worry that Castro will exploit it for propaganda purposes.
Secretary of State Schultz is flying to Paris tomorrow for an urgent meeting with the foreign ministers of France, Britain, and Italy, the other countries furnishing troops for Lebanon's peacekeeping force. But with today's developments, it appears the British and the French will want to talk first about Grenada. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, the State Department.
This is the wrong time to find out you don't have the right insurance. That's why it's a good idea to see an independent insurance agent before you buy your policy. Your independent agent can give you expert advice on how to choose the right coverage at the right price. And they're offering this free booklet that makes choosing the right insurance a little easier. Get it before you need it. Look in the yellow pages for your independent insurance agent, the more than one company agent.
At first, it was just an idea to build a promise into every appliance we make. A promise of pride in our workmanship to create good, honest quality. The promise of a product that assures you your money's worth. And finally, the promise of our entire company to stand behind each appliance. A promise we keep. The Whirlpool promise. It won't solve all your problems, but it's our promise to you to try to make your world a little easier.
Okay, I'm changing the strategy. I just made a Michelob Light for the winner.
Would a bunch of guys really play this hard for a beer? Well, it is Michelob Light, the rich, smooth taste you can compare to any beer you like.
Michelob Light for the winners.
You know what I like most about winning this game? What? The trophy.
Michelob Light.
Hello, Gene. Sorry to call so late, but I'm worried about Mike. I don't like the sound of his cough. It's very congested. Formula 44D? Thanks.
Take strength from this. Vicks Formula 44D is now twice as strong to loosen worrisome chest congestion. It also quiets coughing and helps drain nasal congestion. And it's the only leading formula that can do all that.
See, honey, nothing to worry about.
Vicks Formula 44D, made stronger to take the worry out of congested coughs.
There are some 1,000 Americans on Grenada who found themselves trapped in the middle of a bloody military coup. Most are young medical students who went to Grenada to attend the St. George's University Medical School. The school is headquartered in Bayshore, New York, and that's where its chancellor, Dr. Charles Modica, has an office. Dr. Modica was not in Grenada at the time of the coup, nor for the invasion, and he's with us tonight here in the studio. Doctor, what do you hear about your students as these reports of fighting continue?
Well, I'm very relieved that the students have reported through a ham radio network that we had set up after the first revolution for this type of emergency that there have been no injuries whatsoever to our students, but I remain very concerned for their safety and the situation that has been put upon them.
Personal opinion, Doctor, was this necessary?
Personal opinion, without knowing the factors that the President may have known, in my viewpoint, it was not necessary.
Why do you say that?
Well, I had arranged myself on Thursday when the new government was formed in Grenada and the names were announced. I spoke to some of those people in the new government and I asked them if it wouldn't be a proper thing to allow U.S. diplomats or diplomats from other countries to enter the country to check on the welfare of their citizens. This was while the curfew was imposed that had a shoot-on-sight order for it. And the government was very cooperative. And I felt that this was a very positive sign. I worked it out with the U.S. Embassy officials in Barbados, and in fact, a delegation did leave Barbados on Saturday. We had a few snags, quite frankly, on Saturday morning, but Saturday afternoon, the delegation arrived in Grenada during the curfew was taken over the country, from one end of the country to the other where the campuses were, and the delegation met with students.
Now, the president said, and we have only a few seconds here, that one of the reasons, the main reason for going into this invasion was to protect Americans. Personal opinion, do you think it was necessary to protect your students, who are most of the Americans there?
Well, we had no problems with the regime that was imposed upon us in that they were not attempting to injure the students in any way, and they meant no harm towards them as far as we knew. So we were trying to maintain the cooperation with that regime as long as they respected the rights of our students and our faculty.
Thank you, Doctor. More on Attack on Dawn in a moment.
When you're mentally retarded, it's hard to believe in yourself. You think you can't do things that other people can do. When Toni Marie Chillemi joined Special Olympics, she stopped thinking that way. Special Olympics, world's largest sports program for the mentally retarded, helped Toni learn she could do almost anything. And it felt so good trying. Today, Toni not only performs gymnastics, she teaches at a youth center. But Toni couldn't have changed her life without the volunteers who coached her, encouraged her, helped her believe in herself. Help the mentally retarded believe in themselves.
You did great. Thank you.
Please volunteer your time or your money. Write Special Olympics, Washington, D.C.
There are other American servicemen tonight far from home who have tasted war in a different place and who have paid a painful price. Some of them have made the ultimate sacrifice. The number of U.S. Marines, soldiers, and sailors killed in Sunday's sneak attack on them in Beirut is now known to be at least 216. Many of their names still not known. And in Beirut today, the fear that it could happen again. The Marines there sealing off their base, going on their highest alert. Reports that 3 vehicles packed with explosives were circling, waiting to strike again, even as they searched the rubble for more dead from Sunday's first strike by a truck crammed with explosives. They were searching for more bodies, and they found them. The search is not yet over. Among the badly injured tonight in a Beirut hospital, U.S. Marine Terry Valor, badly burned. While he is, in one way, one of the lucky ones, still alive, fate has thrown him 2 especially nasty curves. Tomorrow is his birthday. He will be 22. Terry's brother Michael is also in the service, and tonight Michael is among the U.S. forces at Grenada. Waiting and worrying about them, both are their parents, Orlando and Janice Valor of Pennsylvania. We spoke with them earlier this evening. Mr. and Mrs. Valor, thank you very much for coming in, and I speak only for myself, but I believe it accurately reflects the feelings of many of your fellow Americans. We appreciate very much, deeply, the service of your family to our country. You have photographs of your sons with you, I believe.
Yes, sir.
Your son Terry, wounded in Beirut.
Yes, sir.
Son Michael, service at Grenada.
Yes, sir.
And he is married to a naval officer.
Yes, sir.
Could you tell me, Mr. Valor, what you've been feeling, what you and your wife have been thinking these past few days?
We have been feeling horrible, but we are very fortunate, much more than all the other people. We felt that our son, although he is wounded, we are very, very lucky for him to come out of that building in a greater success than everybody else. And I don't feel it's right to have 2 boys out there when one is too many already.
I know how very proud that you are of them, and justifiably so, but I gather, Mr. Valor, that you and your wife are quite anxious to get Terry out of that hospital in Beirut.
Yes, sir. Very much so. We feel that he has done his part. He is in trouble. We feel that we have medication in this country second to none. We feel that at the nearest point that he can be brought back to this country, that he should be brought. He is burnt bad. And we have, like I says, we have medication here second to none in this country. And I can't see why we cannot get the Medicare that he needs and the best, because I feel that he has given his best to this country.
Thank you very, very much, Orlando and Janice Ballure.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Alone and isolated as they may feel tonight, the Ballures are not alone. Around the big U.S. Marine base at Camp Lejeune, Bruce Hall tells us about other American families, families both proud and scared.
The Marines at Camp Lejeune remain on an increased state of alert this evening, ready to provide additional troops to either Lebanon or Grenada if needed. It was only a week ago that Shirley Graybill and her 2 children said goodbye to Sergeant Douglas Graybill. He was bound for Beirut, but then was diverted to Grenada.
I was glad that he was heading to Grenada instead of Beirut, but now, to me, I'm just as scared if he'd be in either place.
Joan Guerra is scared too. She did not even have a chance to tell her husband goodbye. He was shipped out on an hour's notice Sunday while she was out shopping. She still does not know where he is.
It's hard at times like this. You have to have a lot of love, and you have to have a lot of faith that you know he's going to come back.
With so many families not knowing the status of their servicemen in Lebanon or Grenada, the mayor of Jacksonville said,
people are just, they're almost frightened, really. Emotions run so high at a time like this because of the fact that any time that a Marine loses his life, it's sort of a part of Jacksonville that is lost.
And tomorrow the churches of Jacksonville will begin holding a series of memorial services, with the names of so many of those being memorialized still not known. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Jacksonville, North Carolina.
A member of Congress asked today, after hearing first of the calamity in Beirut and then of the invasion of Grenada, are we looking for a war we can win? Many Americans tonight are no doubt thinking, well, there's nothing wrong with that. We needed to do something besides just wring our hands and watch our enemies bully us. Other Americans, no doubt, think the U.S. military has been too busy and too hasty and spread too thin with just one approach, guns and dead sons. But most of us tonight may be thinking we simply don't have enough information to make any judgment, other than these are dangerous times. And American dead and wounded are still being counted tonight in 2 remote places, thousands of miles from the green, green grass of home. For CBS News, Dan Rather in New York, good night.
Do I smell roast duck?
For tonight, our anniversary.
Yeah, great!
The Bell Yellow Pages talks when your fingers do the walking. You save trouble and time.
Leslie's Flowers. We get there fresh.
How about fast?
And fast.
You remembered.
I ordered the flowers after you started the duck.
So I burned the duck after you ordered the flowers.
Get the Yellow Pages talking.
Fresh and fast.
Let your fingers do the walking.
Can Lysol disinfectant spray help cut down on colds? Some leading scientists believe disinfecting is one way to cut down on the spread of colds. Surfaces in your home can get contaminated with rhinovirus, a leading cause of colds. You touch them, rub your eyes or nose, and you can pick up a cold. Research shows that Lysol spray, sprayed on surfaces, can kill the rhinovirus. That's no guarantee your family won't catch colds. But if Lysol spray can help reduce the chances, isn't it worth it?
This has been a CBS News Special Report. This is CBS.